Welcome back. So we're going to build upon humility today and talk about submission and sacrifice. And so I think, humility and submission and sacrifice are probably, they kind of go hand in hand as being a difficult daily thing, right? When we look at submission and sacrifice, how do we build this posture and maintain it? And, all jokes aside, there's a few ways to get submission, right? There's the jujitsu move where I'm putting someone in a headlock and I'm demanding that of them, right? That, which is never going to fly in a loving marriage. And then there's the freedom aspect of humility. And that is just like in our relationship with God, like God could come down and say, submit, you better follow me or it's done. And we'd have no choice and we'd be robots and we would follow God. And it wouldn't be what he wants because he wants a relationship with us that's built on freedom. It's the same thing in our marriage. And that is, to me, it's one of the most beautiful things about a marriage is that we're submitting, but we're choosing to submit. And I could get teary when I think about the beauty of someone choosing. Pam, the fact that you choose to submit to me and I choose to submit to you is the most special thing in a human relationship that I think anyone can ever experience. So who is our inspiration? Shocker. It's Jesus, right? The ultimate sacrifice. And he submitted to God on our behalf. And so, when we think about submission and gender roles too, there's a lot of Christians and non-Christians who sometimes get confused about this topic of submission because a lot of people gravitate to this verse, wives, submit to your husband. And we're going to go, and this is a really amazing section. And my hat's off to Chris Langham. He wrote this content and gave us permission to use it. So I've never seen anything better that helps us understand what the Bible says about submission and how that operates with husbands and wives. And I know when we were going through this, you had some reactions to that. You want to talk about that?
Well, I think I was really worried about teaching women and wives to that verse. I mean, the verse, wives submit to your husbands, is kind of a scary sounding verse. And I think it's not because we don't want to submit to our husbands. It's because you kind of feel, if you're reading it in the Bible, that that's what God says we have to do. But the beautiful thing about this, and the reason that we loved Chris Langham's description of it, is because he explains it so beautifully that it's not wives submit to your husbands alone. It's husbands first submit to your wives or as they love the church. So it's a unified submission. It's not just wives submitting, it's husbands first submitting to wives as they would through the church, but together you're both submitting. So I think that's the best way that I've ever heard it explained, and basically why we paraphrased it.
Yeah, I love it. It's so neat and special. And again, that gateway to how when we submit to our spouse, we submit to God, it allows us to submit to others in our lives. And the fruit that comes out of that, the fruit of submission and sacrifice, is an amazing marriage. It's an amazing relationship with God. It's a different, special opportunity to connect with your friends. And so there's just so much, again, on the other side of submission and sacrifice. So one of the really neat aspects of the section that you're going to go through is, what do we do when our spouse's actions and behavior, you don't naturally feel like you should submit or should show sacrifice. And that will come up in a relationship. Again, we're two imperfect people. And so your spouse may start acting in such a way that you're like, no, you're being unkind and I don't want to submit to you, or you're being domineering, or you're being rude, whatever the circumstance may be. And here's the really neat thing. The ability to submit and sacrifice, it is a superpower. It's a superpower from God that we have, that we can use in our marriage. So we're going to submit and be sacrificial, not because their behavior warrants it. That's what the world offers you. The world offers you earn good behavior. The Bible calls us to show good behavior, to be loving, to submit and show sacrifice because we love God. We're submitting to God, and that is being funneled into our spouse. And the beauty, and we've seen this with couples and we've seen it in other areas of our lives, is when we lean into that, what happens? What does the person who's being rude and unkind do when we submit and are sacrificial to them? How do they react when we're humble? They eventually come around, right? Because love never returns void. Love, God will do his work with love. And it's out of our hands. We're loving, and God's going to work on their heart. He's going to work on their attitude. He's going to work on their actions. And it requires consistency. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes when when a relationship's out of alignment and one spouse is kind of going sideways, it's easy to say, well, I did my one thing. I was nice to them for one day and they weren't nice back. So I'm quitting. That technique doesn't work. What do we do? What do you say to someone when that happens?
Well, I mean, it's a lot harder to show grace and humility and all of that when you're in a point of contention.
Yeah.
But because we do have the freedom to choose that we are going to sacrifice ourselves in behalf of our lover, it's a lot easier. We may have to take a moment and remember that, but all in all, that's what makes everything in a marriage that has sacrifice and humility different than everybody else's marriages. So it's so critically important to just take that minute and remember that this is the superpower that you've been given out of choice.
And so when we think about this, it's really a two-way street. We can be in the situation where we're having to be sacrificial and submissive to a spouse whose maybe behavior doesn't inspire that at the moment. But we also have to recognize we might be the person who's being unkind, and we need to be aware. And so how do we recognize when we're out of alignment? And so if you are in a relationship and you're feeling anger or resentment or frustration, we need to be aware of those things and pick up on those things. And what do we do when we become self-aware that we have this mindset with our spouse? It's always going to be the same answer. So this is the beauty. It's the one answer to all the challenges when we're out of alignment is we go to God. We need to spend time with God. We need to recenter. We need to reflect. And one of the things I do this in my own relationship with some family members. I'm not going to name them in case they're watching. But I do is when I get frustrated, and I do this with other people too in relationships, when I get frustrated by someone and I don't like their behavior and I'm struggling to be loving and kind when their behavior doesn't warrant it, is I go and I say, God, part of my recentering process is, God, when do I do this to you? Do I ever do this to you, God, in my relationship with you? And sadly, I've yet to find a scenario where someone didn't do something to me that was offensive or hurt my feelings, and I don't recognize that I actually do that to God at times. And so it naturally humbles me and lets me get into the appropriate posture to then love and to show grace and to show mercy. Because the truth is, I can never look down on anyone if I'm below them, right? So I have to be above someone to look down on someone. And so I know if I'm looking down on someone, I'm in the wrong place anyway.
Yeah.
And I need to get low. I need to be in a submissive posture and to be willing to show sacrifice. And like all of these things, they're hard and they seem unnatural at times. But on the other side is God's goodness, deep relationships, love, hope, all the things that we really want in life. They're byproducts of us doing the difficult things on certain days and times. So I'm going to say gentlemen, and maybe it's a woman. I don't want to stereotype. Are you a peacock? Do you just naturally, did God make you just kind of confident and you're the life of the party and you're the first person to speak? You naturally are a leader and you take charge. What we're not saying about submission and sacrifice is that you lose your identity, that you lose how God made you, right? God, if God made you that way, that's awesome. Let's celebrate it. But you can be a leader and also a servant. You can be a leader and be sacrificial. So we're asking you is don't lose your identity, and nor should your spouse tell you you need to become something that you're not. But we do still need to recognize those two things still need to go hand in hand. When we're operating in God's will, then we can be a leader and we can be the life of the party and we can have fun and be outgoing, but we're always still looking for that opportunity that we're in a posture of submission and sacrifice.
Well, and with women, I mean, we're usually attracted to the peacocks and the leaders and the ones who have, a lot of confidence about them. So don't lose that. That's important.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we're going to talk about how women can actually they're a big driver in terms of where men end up on that scale, right? There's things sometimes where the interactions are actually tearing down men and they're becoming not what a woman wants out of them. And both parties are unaware of why it's happening. We're going to cover that later. All right, well, we'll wrap this up and we're going to send you into the exercise when you complete this section. And this is going to be interesting. And this is an opportunity for you two to better understand one another, because we're going to kind of look at what has submission looked like for you in your life history. And that could be family, that could be prior relationships, it could be what you observed, what you experienced growing up.
A positive or a negative.
Yeah, a great point. You might have really positive examples you can pull from, but understanding where each of you is coming from as it relates to this topic is going to help you understand each other and understand maybe one of you might be a little bit more advanced or further down the road on the ease at which you can get in that submissive posture than the other person. But by understanding the history there, it's going to let you have maybe more grace and compassion as your partner is kind of learning that and practicing that aspect of your relationship.